Thank you for inviting me and being here today. My name is Eva Hartmann, and I'm the founder of the newly formed Interior Wildlife Rehabilitation Society as of last year. So we are brand new kids on the block. We are located in Kelowna right now. And my presentation today will focus on the following topics. So together we'll explore what wildlife rehabilitation is about, including the purposes of wildlife rehabilitation and a little brief philosophy of what it's actually about. We will explore the need for a wildlife care facility in the Okanagan, our efforts of building such a facility here locally, as well as how to participate in wildlife rehabilitation as a member of the public, and why we advocate for a peaceful coexistence with wild animals. So just give me one sec here. I'm trying to find my way through the presentation. There we go. All righty. So with its fast-growing population, the Okanagan is seeing a significant increase in wildlife injuries and displacement. And more than 90% are admitted as a direct result of human activities. So most animals that do come into the care of wildlife rehabilitators in the province are coming because people have had some kind of impact on these animals. In fact, over the past 40 years, we've seen an increase here, and this is Canada-wide. So in the Okanagan, we see an increase as well. However, we do not have a rehabilitation center locally. So the top reasons for admission to wildlife rehabilitation centers in BC are these four, mainly birds, songbirds in particular, being injured or killed by cats. Number two is vehicle collisions. Actually, yearly, over 10,000 vehicle wildlife collisions are reported in British Columbia. And this is data that's being collected by the Ministry of Transportation and actually published by wildlifecollisions.ca, located in Kamloops. Number three is window strikes. Again, lots of birds actually, it's a striking number, tens of millions yearly of window strikes are recorded to happen within the whole country. This is Canada-wide. And the number is according to Nature Canada's webpage. So interestingly enough, actually, most of these collisions, birds flying into windows, are birds flying into individual house windows. So this is not even necessarily skyscrapers. That's a way smaller number there. And the fourth reason is displacement and disturbance of animals. That includes, for example, urban sprawl, in the bigger picture, pollution, invasive species, as well as fishing, farming, or any other natural resource extraction. So there is lots of reasons why animals get admitted to rehabilitation centers. Displacement can also just include animals that are in people's private houses. So think squirrel nests in the attic, where they might have babies and then they're running around under the roof. And understandably, this is not always wanted by house owners. So that could be a reason for displacement disturbance as well, if the squirrels just get fished out from under a roof because they nest there. So what is wildlife rehabilitation? Here's a quick definition. It's actually the act of providing temporary care to injured, sick, or orphaned wildlife with the goal of releasing them back into the wild. And this is important to note. The releasing is what makes it out compared to other types of rehabilitation. This is not wildlife rehabilitation, unlike humans that might need to go to rehab, so to say, from substance abuse or, for example, a sports injury. Having recovered from physical or mental illnesses as humans would is not enough for wildlife rehabilitation. So successful rehabilitation requires the animal to be able to truly function as wild animals. And there are 3 considerations that have to be fulfilled in order to call them this. So number 1 is food. The animals that are rehabilitated need to be able to recognize and obtain appropriate foods appropriate for their species. They need to show appropriate fear of potential dangers, for example, people, cars, or pets. And they need to be able to select mates of their own species and reproduce in a perfect world. Now, this isn't always happening, but this is what we aim for. So speaking of the purposes of wildlife rehabilitation, a lot of the times I get asked, why are you doing this, Eva? I've been asked several times just by the media or even my family, private, in private background, what are the purposes of wildlife rehabilitation? Why don't we just leave the animals alone and let them do their thing? So there is lots of purposes for wildlife rehabilitation, and these are just the main ones that I've listed here. So responsible stewardship of humans taking care of ecosystems is an obvious one, and just humanely taking care of the wild animals that we share the land with is also obvious, but there are other ones, and that include disease monitoring. So rehabilitators are often the first people to notice when disease outbreaks happen, because animals with diseases are brought into rehabilitation centers for human care. And then the authorities can be notified, as well as just generally bigger picture promoting ecosystem health and reducing the human impact that we have on all sorts of different species. It must not just include animals that are already endangered or species that are endangered. It's reducing the human impact on all wild animals, as well as just simply a public service. So the public requests more and more. We have 2021, not to kill all injured and wild animals, just simply due to the lack of rehabilitation resources. And this is what's happening in the Okanagan right now. Simply the finder cares. So that's another big purpose for rehabilitation to be needed in our area. So a little bit of an overview. Here's a map of BC, and the wildlife rehabilitation centers that are currently operating and are licensed in British Columbia are listed on the Wildlife Rehabilitators Network. There's the webpage here, wrnbc.org. and they have 23 licensed facilities listed that have been established in the past 50 years. So you might notice that there are a lot of licensed centers in our province. However, they are concentrated in the Lower Mainland and on Vancouver Island, as you might see in the blue dots here on the map. Where we are, there is not that many centers actually available to take animals in. However, reports to conservation officers services in the area in our valley are increasing, and there is a little graph here that we've made. So if you're looking at just the data from the CO service from January 1st in 2013 to December 31st in 2020, the reports of total injured and orphaned wildlife to the conservation services have nearly tripled in just 7 years. And yet we still do not have a center here. On the right-hand side, you'll see the approximate service area of Interior Wildlife Rehabilitation Society. So this green area here, we are aiming at servicing the area all the way from just south of Penticton to in the north to Salmon Arm. As I said before, right now, no licensed rehabilitation facility exists in our valley north of Oliver. And this means that without transport to the centers that are far away from here, euthanasia has been the only option and currently still is for any animals that might need to come in for care. Now, who is euthanizing these animals legally? To do so are veterinarians if the animals are suffering, as well as conservation officers on site as well. So wildlife rehabilitation, a service the public expects, is easy to see if you just look at the numbers of the rehabilitation centers that are actually licensed close to us here in Kelowna. So the BC Wildlife Park has a rehabilitation department in Kamloops, and the intakes have increased. This is just between 2019 to 2020. Little Mittens in Golden, which is the newest wildlife rehabilitation center in BC that has received a license. In their very first year in 2018, which is when they got their license, they had 67 animals admitted to their center, and in the next year they already had 120 animals in the whole year. Sorco, which is the Raptor Rehabilitation Center in Oliver, generally admits between 80 and 100 raptors yearly. So the need is clearly there. And if we are looking at which kinds of species are most commonly admitted to local centers around us, it includes California quail, Canada geese, and great blue herons. So this is why we are building our facility here, and our focus for that will be to be able to house water birds and small mammals. And our care facility construction has actually just begun this year. So the pictures that you can see here is us building our facility in Summerland from scratch. We didn't even have utilities. We've been able to put all those in between spring and now, and we are currently building outdoor enclosures, and we are also working on our permit application because legally all wildlife rehabilitation centers in British Columbia need to have an operating permit in order to be able to open their doors. And it is actually illegal to keep wildlife in your possession as a member of the public for longer than 24 hours. So this is why, obviously, we want to have a license. Interesting as well is a little bit of statistics here, just to give you an idea of how many resources are commonly needed for wildlife rehabilitation for animals that are in care. It varies a lot, species dependent. Between $250 and $2,000 is a rough estimate that's needed to rehabilitate an animal. And the time that animals are in care varies greatly as well. We've just done a comparison here. A squirrel might only stay for a few days or weeks, whereas to rehabilitate a beaver kid can take up to 2 years, and most of the times has to take up to 2 years. So there's a great variance here of how long animals stay in care at rehabilitation centers that already have a license. So how can you report, how can you support wildlife rehabilitation? Just by knowing the facts and talking to your friends, colleagues, family about what to do in cases that you might think an animal may need to go into a care facility. I have two examples here. Example, mammals, lots of fawns basically get kidnapped because people are just not aware that they stay alone and away from the doe for the first 2 weeks of their life, hidden, and they might find a fawn and then just pick it up, thinking that it needs care. Another reason why people might bring animals in, which also is a no-no, is to pick up songbirds or other birds that might just be fledglings and might just be learning to fly and are hopping around on the ground. So do know when and when not to pick up baby wild animals. And before I wrap up, I would like to just briefly discuss how you can avoid conflicts between wild animals and humans in general, just by practicing peaceful coexistence, which is what we advocate at Interior Wildlife here actively. To manage attractants is a big one. Do not leave your garbage uncovered. It's all the things that we generally do read over and over, but sometimes we might forget in our own backyard, not leaving fruit hanging on the trees in the fall in order to attract any other any animals that might eat them instead of us. And do not disturb wildlife in their natural habitats. This one is an obvious one, kind of ties in with what I had talked about, not to be a fawn napper or to take baby birds that are not injured and just learning to fly. It also means to exclude wildlife instead of removing them where needed. So what do I mean with that? Relocation is often just a temporary and reactive solution and does not work. One little note about relocation. So animals that might be trapped because they are not wanted where they were found and relocated are distressed, disoriented, and possibly injured just from trapping. They may have left young behind. They may have difficulty finding shelter and food or get attacked from locally established animals. Just think somebody would drop you in the middle of New York with a dime in your pocket. You probably wouldn't do so well either. And it's no different for most cases, not all, but most cases of animals that get trapped and relocated into a foreign area. So with that, I would like to wrap up my presentation. Thank you so much to the BC Grasslands Conservation Council for inviting us. And a huge thank you to our volunteers and supporters, as well as our private donors. If you are interested in our work, you can go to interiorwildlife.ca. We've just created a webpage, and you can also, if you are inclined to do so, help us out with our work. There's a link. It's called Ways to Support Us. Of course, you can become a member. We actually have been able to get 50 members to date within our first year here of our existence, and you can check out our wish list. We have a physical and an online wish list on our webpage as well. You can always drop me a line if you have any questions, and send an email to info@interiorwildlife.ca. I try my best to answer at least within a week. And with that, I would like to acknowledge our partners and supporters, as well as acknowledgements to our friends and partners that I've had conversations with. And I would like to open the rest of the time here for discussion.